You are listening to the Foreign Policy Focus podcast.
We cannot wait for the final proof. The smoking gun. It could come in the form of a mushroom cloud.
Haven't you driven enough people from their homes already? Bulldoze their villages, seize their property and their laws. They had no part in making it.
Now working in Libya with friends and allies, we've demonstrated what collective action can achieve in the 21st century.
Now the host of the show, Kyle Ansel.
This is episode 338 of the Foreign Policy Focus podcast. As you all expect, this is the second half of my interview with Scott Horton. In this half, we cover Wikileaks and some information that they've put out about Israel. We talk about the oppression of the Palestinians and just some terrible things that the American empire does. Scott is the editorial director of antiwar.com, the managing editor at Libertarian Institute, which is where you can find this show and my daily news roundup. He is the author of Fool's Errand and the host of Scott Horton Show. Here's the second half of that interview.
Anyway, where were we?
EFPs, didn't come from Iran. And one of the things I was thinking of saying there was, too, is imagine if the standard that we held people to internationally, was you're responsible for the bombs or the weapons you give to other countries. Look at, Yemen. Let's talk about that first. But
in fact, I'm worried about my own double standard there because, you know what, I do blame those deaths on the Americans for doing that. The Saudis couldn't do it at all without the USA. So I guess I'm kind of going, you know what? If the Iranians really were dumping those bombs in, then that's something certainly to criticize them for. Now, again, get out of the soda straw and zoom out. What are they doing? They're essentially saying, okay, America, you helped us install our favorite pets in power. Now we're driving home to you the fact that we're staying and you're going. Thanks a lot, but don't let the door hit you in the ass on the way out. So, in other words, it's pretty hard to accept a bunch of crybabying about that and crocodile tears from the U.S. government when the entire project is all their fault in the first place. Who decided to get rid of Saddam Hussein? Essentially, it was a bunch of Zionists listening to the Iranian spy, Ahmed Chalabi, going, yeah, you really ought to get rid of Saddam. It's going to help Israel. When what he really meant is it's going to help the Ayatollah. But Richard Pearl, Paul Wolfowitz, they like hearing what they like hearing. That's sort of their speciality. And so they did this. So, anyway. And by the way, it wasn't the Iranians that, even assuming it was the Iranians that were arming Sadr. They weren't telling Sadr, okay, attack the Americans and drive them out. The Americans were attacking them. They were essentially defending themselves. The Americans were claiming that Sadr was the most Iranian-tied, not Dawit and Skiri, when he was actually the most nationalist, and they were the ones who were most tied to Iran. But they accused him of being the Iranian agent and then attacked all his forces. They actually ended up even chasing him into Iran for safety when they kept trying to kill him, where he went to school and got a higher religious rank while he was there and became closer to Iran than ever before. And yet still he maintained the standard that he wanted America and Iran out, that he wanted, Iraqi nationalism to survive and an end to sectarian war there, which was so horrible. I mean, the war that happened, and Sadr's men were responsible right along with the Badr Brigade for the ethnic cleansing, or the sectarian cleansing of Baghdad. They're guilty as hell of that too. But they also, at sometimes tried to ally with the Sunnis as long as they were fighting against the Americans, because they were, essentially Iraqi patriots as well, in a nationalist sense, as well as sectarian, and sometimes counter to their sectarianism. Anyway, I'm going on this topic, but you know what? Let's get back to the Manning leak. So Manning, because that was what we were talking about, was the collateral murder, right? So this is the context. America is fighting a mini war that they never had to fight inside a major war that they never had to fight. And this is what Manning is exposing, is civilians being slaughtered in the middle of that mess. And, the WikiLeaks also reveal the proof of exactly what I'm saying here about allying with the Supreme Islamic Council. Their militia is called the Badr Organization, or the Badr Corps, or the Badr Brigade, depending on which way you search it there, but it's all out there. And they are ruthless killers. And they came in right on the heels of the American invasion. And, I think Robert Dreyfus explained this best. That Muqtada al-Sadr is a working class schlub with bad teeth and this kind of thing. And to a bunch of blue bloods like Bush and his people, they looked at him as such a ghetto scumbag that they just couldn't take him seriously at all. In fact, there's a hilarious quote, hilarious in the worst way, of Paul Bremer, the viceroy, asking his little, blonde-headed daughter of a Republican donor who was serving as his aide, "Who's this Muqtada al-Sadr guy?" And she says, "Oh, he's some minor cleric. Don't worry about it." Yeah, he's pretty minor, all right. Except that his father and his father-in-law were both martyred by Saddam Hussein. And that Sadr City, the huge ghetto in East Baghdad, was named after his father. That he had more street credibility as a Shiite leader on the ground than anyone else in all of Iraqi Shiistan. But they treated him like he was nothing but scum because he refused to kowtow to them. Meanwhile, the leaders of the Supreme Islamic Council, who were directly in the employ of the Ayatollah Khamenei in Iran, well, they wear nice robes, and they went to college in London and this kind of thing. And so when they met with the Americans, they put on as high class an act as they could, that we're as close as social peers to you as a brown man could be kind of attitude. And so they got along much better. And, Robert Dreyfuss wrote a great article about this in 2006 called Bush's Meeting with a Murderer, where they brought Abdulaziz al-Hakim to the United States to meet with Bush. And this is our major ally. Well, as the Manning leak shows, the Badr Brigade was torturing Sunnis to death, mass murdering them. And the Americans knew it. And the Americans were under order. It was called Frago 242, which I wonder if that was like a joke, like Front 242, the old techno band or whatever. Anyway, Frago 242 said, go ahead and turn Iraqi Sunnis over to the Badr Brigade. The Wolf Brigade was a faction of them, essentially a special operations team, to be tortured and killed. And in fact, there's a famous clip of Donald Rumsfeld is asked at a press conference, hey, what if the Americans know that the Iraqis that they're working with are going to torture some guy? Don't the Americans have an obligation to prevent that? And Donald Rumsfeld says quite deliberately, they'd been through this, that that's not our problem. That's between them and this and that. And at that moment, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Peter Pace, interrupted and said, that is incorrect, Mr. Secretary. The law says that absolutely we are obligated to intervene to prevent war crimes on behalf of our Iraqi allies in the field. There's no question about that. And Rumsfeld's like, can't believe the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff just outright, straight up said wrong. Well, guess what? Pace was wrong. Because the reality was that's exactly what the Americans were doing under his authority and under Rumsfeld's authority, and no one was prosecuted for it. That's exactly what happened. And, of course, this is not to belie the stories of American torture. The Americans had their entire own torture campaign going on there. I'm not trying to – a lot of times the media will make this sound like, oh, well, some Iraqis did some torturing of some other Iraqis, but you know how they are. Yeah, This was an American government program. Don't you forget that for 1 second. And by the way, and I think this is important, the movie version of history becomes in so many ways the official version that Americans understand and believe on, any event, the Alamo or Pearl Harbor or any old thing that you got, man. Franklin Roosevelt, most people know about him from Little Orphan Annie. You know what I mean? Like, this is seriously. So Clint Eastwood put out this movie called American Sniper based on Chris Kyle's book. And in that movie, Kyle saves innocent Iraqis from the evil Sunni insurgents with the power drills who are torturing them to death. The bad guys are. But that's not the history of Iraq War II. In Iraq War II, the guys who were using power drills to torture people to death were working for and with the United States of America. And that's the real deal. That's the Badr Brigade, the Wolf Brigade, and all that is in the Wikileaks. In other words, so ask yourself again, regardless of your partisan position in 2010, whoever you are, not you, Kyle, but whoever might be listening, think the American people have the right to know that, or don't they? That their government is committing war crimes with our money and in our names, all wrapped in the red, white, and blue flag and everything you believe in, torturing people to death with power drills. If I said to you, in the Soviet Union, you know what they would do? They would torture people to death with power drills. You would go, man, ain't that the definition of communism, right?
Right.
That's the definition of the lawless totalitarianism in the most brutal fashion. The worst kind of horror movie scenes that you could conjure up. And, you know, this stuff was going on. It wasn't just the CIA. It wasn't just the Baader Brigade. Stanley McChrystal was the commander of Camp Nama, which stood for nasty-ass military area, where men were tortured to death. Where Corporal Fishback was the whistleblower, who said that they would have these men tied up and they would just go out and use them as heavy bags for their punching and kicking and Muay Thai training. They'd say, I'm going to go smoke a puck. A puck was a dehumanizing acronym, person under control. I'm going to go smoke a puck meant torture them with lit cigarettes. I'm going to go work a puck meant I'm going to go and use a man tied up as a heavy bag and practice my high kicks. And it's worse. I mean, people, I think, know the electrocutions, the rapes. You know, Seymour Hersh didn't publish this in the New Yorker, but he's repeated it numerous times, that American and Iraqi soldiers raped children in Abu Ghraib prison in front of their mothers to try to get them to turn in the fathers. That is the middle part of North America, the worst barbarians in the world today. Yeah, all in the name of civilization, all in the name of liberalism and law.
So, you know, I remember at the time, the one thing they said here as a response that I really couldn't answer until I eventually saw Ron Paul's Giuliani moment in 2011. But it was when they said, well, the reason we can't put this out is because it's going to, you know, enrage the Muslims. And then they're going to come kill all of us for the things that we did to them. Right. And that's the reason that this is terrible to put out.
Right. Which concedes the entire argument. You know, my response at that time was, I thought you said that they don't care how many of them that we bombed to death or starved to death or tortured to death. The only thing they care about is how innocent we are. The only thing they care about is how free and good and Christian and peaceful we are. The more we share with each other, the more they want to cut our throats. Isn't that right? Are you trying to tell me that Ronald Reagan's holy warrior mercenaries only turned on the United States because George H.W. Bush and Bill Clinton mass murdered them? Mass murdered people that they decided to avenge? Are you telling me that history didn't begin on September 11th, but that actually Bill Clinton killed at least 500,000 people in Iraq War 1.5, and that they mined stuff like that? You're telling me some Arab lady cares if you blow up her son to death? I guess that sounds like partially plausible, huh? Not that I ever stopped to think about it before. You know what? Sorry for being just stupid and sarcastic. Let's get real. The guy that was the ringleader of the 9/11 plot inside the United States, the team leader essentially of that special forces team of Al-Qaeda terrorists who did 9/11, was Mohammed Atta. He was the alpha male of the Hamburg cell in Germany. Okay, he piloted Flight 11 into the North Tower, I guess it was. Okay, he did that because America supported Israel killing Palestinians in Lebanon. Does that make sense? Mohammed Atta crashed that plane into that tower because of American support for Israel killing Palestinians in Lebanon. It wasn't because he couldn't stand the fact that Americans believed in Jesus. Muslims believe in Jesus. Say Jesus in front of a Muslim and he'll say, peace be upon him. That's not why they hated Americans. And you know what? It's really too bad that it was George W. Bush. I mean, or, you know, could have been McCain, I guess. But if you just taken like some random Republican instead who wasn't George Bush's son, if it had been Donald Trump who had been elected in the year 2000, he could have said, look, this is really bad and we're going to bomb the hell out of Tora Bora or whatever. But we all know that this is all Bill Clinton's fault. George Bush and Bill Clinton, they enraged Ronald Reagan's terrorist mercenaries. We all know that. So all we have to do is stop acting like Bill Clinton and everything will be okay. But instead it was George Bush's son. So what's he going to do? Yeah, my dad really screwed up by occupying Saudi Arabia. And the Republican Congress really screwed up by forcing Clinton to give the Israelis even more money and guns than they ever wanted. So, you know what I mean? He was born into that. He was a part of it. He couldn't help but be a part of it, even though he'd only been the governor of Texas. It was his family relation that had got this whole post-Cold War ball rolling. So all they could do was say they hate us because we're good and innocent. And the more innocent we are, the more they hate us. So faced with a completely irrational religiously motivated enemy that will stop at nothing to kill us. And the more innocent we are, the worse they want to kill us. Then that gives us only one option, obviously, which is to wage total war until they all surrender. Which, of course, because it's all based on false premises, can't possibly work, and instead has done exactly what everyone who knew better said would happen, which is spread terrorism and spread numbers of bin Ladenite fighters and bin Ladenite groups all around the world, numbering into the tens of thousands. It's all only made everything worse because that's what it was always about, American intervention in the Middle East. And George Bush would say, I have clips like this where he gets it all just inverted. And he goes, look, they hated us because they live under these terrible tyrannies. And so that's why we have to give them a democracy so they can be free, so that they won't have this resentment that makes them want to attack us. I have that clip somewhere here on the pile. So in other words, he thinks I'm almost right. What it really is, it's not that America supports Mubarak in Egypt and King Fahd in Saudi. No, it's that America used to support Saddam Hussein, and he's still there, and we need to get rid of him and create a democracy there in this country that had nothing to do with attacking us, even though they were being avenged, and the occupation of Saudi in order to bomb and blockade the Iraqi people was a huge part of Osama bin Laden's motive, of course. But none of them had anything to do with the war against us. So, yeah, it's a hell of a thing. And I remember listening to talk radio on, I don't know, September 13th or 23rd or something, within a week or two, something, and hearing this whole long introduction of this guy explaining that when our government says that they hate us because we're free, that's just not true. And all due respect to George Bush and all that, the American people have to know the truth. That's not what it is, okay? See, the reality is totally different. And he goes on and on, like setting it up. And I'm like all excited. I'm driving on the freeway going, okay, man, this guy's going to finally explain that this is all Bill Clinton's fault or something, And he builds it up. They're not being straight with us. They're not telling us the truth. The truth is that Muhammad is Satan and that Islam is the religion of the devil, and they're hell-bent on destroying us, and we have no choice but to destroy them first. Them meaning all of them. Because no one could just say that these terrorists used to work for Ronald Reagan and George Bush, and then that same George Bush stabbed them in the back, and then Bill Clinton twisted the knife, and then they attacked us on the next Bush's watch. That's it. There's a very simple, accurate chronology. It doesn't have a thing to do with God. Which, by the way, you notice how they never translate Allah into God when they talk about Muslims and their dedication to Allah. They want Americans to believe that that's a different God than the God of the Hebrews from the Bible that the Christians believe in too. They want to pretend like, and this is nothing against Hinduism or whatever, but it's just an entirely different religious system. And that's what they want to try to pretend about Islam, when of course that's not true at all. They just don't want Americans to think for a minute that, wait, these people revere Jesus. They don't consider him Christ, but neither do the Jews. So Americans don't hold that against Jews anymore, at least, hopefully. But they believe in Jesus for real, and that he was a prophet sent by God. That's pretty good, right? Yeah. But no, you're not supposed to know that or think about that. And Lord knows, at this point, Muslims probably more and more around the world, have an attitude that, boy, those who are the Christian breakoff of our same religion sure are aggressive and violent, in the name of turn the other cheek, in the name of their own innocence. But I don't know. You know what, Kyle? I'm sorry. Let me just say one more thing about this. I don't know why anyone should have to be so married in their emotions to the activities of the U.S. government. I mean, if everything I just said had instead been the history of what the English had been doing over there, had never had anything to do with us, but I was just a historian of all of England's follies in the Middle East here and the different prime ministers there who had done all these things, then would that be that much easier to hear for people? Like, I'm a Texan. I'm an American. I'm as patriotic for my land and my people as I can be, and that's as inclusive as, I can conceive it. Everyone in this society. I am of us. I want what's best for us. I'm not sitting here being anti-American. But the thing is, who are we and what is it that we're doing? And, I am an individualist, so I don't want to be too communist in spreading the responsibility around, because it is the decisions of these politicians and the decisions of these think tankers, these generals, these spies, these individual human beings who've made the decisions they've made and implemented those decisions, and they bear their own responsibility. And yet at the same time, just like Ron Paul says, even in the Soviet Union, the lawless totalitarian dictatorship, when the people were sick and tired of supporting it, the whole thing just screeched to a halt and fell down. That was it. It was over. So if the American people cared, they cared enough to know what the truth was, and upon learning the truth cared enough to demand an end to this, it would be over. It would. They would have to figure out some other way to steal than doing it in the name of selling bombs to Saudi to kill Yemeni babies or whichever project we're talking about. But essentially, people don't care, or they identify so closely with the government that they just won't hear it, that what the USA is doing and has done is wrong, and that the things that our government says about the narrative surrounding all of this stuff is not true. I always like to invoke Martin Luther King, because here's a guy who is more PC than anything in the world, right? He now represents the conscience of America trying to get their sins straight and be better, And he said that the United States government is the greatest purveyor of violence in the world today. Well, that was true. I mean, I don't know if you count Mao starving everybody to death. We could fight about that, but pretty damn close, certainly when it comes to carpet bombing. And there's just no question that that's true now. There's no other country in the world that does what America does, going around launching these wars of regime change, empowering al-Qaeda terrorists accidentally and then on purpose, and all of this craziness. There's nothing else in the world going on like what the American empire is doing to the Middle East. It's completely crazy, and it's completely unjustified. And my only worry as I talk about this and as I'm working on this book is that I really am afraid that somehow I'm going to finally throw a big enough pebble and make a ripple and have some marginal influence that would help with building a consensus that we really do want to now wrap this thing up and call this thing off. And I'm just afraid that all these resources are just going to be deployed toward a nuclear war with Russia instead. That, these libertarians are right. We shouldn't be screwing around in the Middle East. Again, that's what Jimmy Carter's saying. China's getting ahead of us because we've been wasting all our money screwing around in the Middle East. Music to Trump's ears. But boy, that ain't libertarianism, man. That's liberalism and conservatism that posits that where China gains in strength and power, that we therefore lose, and that we must struggle then to prevent any losses in the face of the rising strength of China, which is a policy of global suicide, or certainly national suicide. It's completely crazy. Just play out the thought experiments in your head. They have H-bombs. They won't give in. Okay? They're not going to let us do a color-coded revolution in Beijing, are they? No. They're not going to back down on their buildup on their own coast, are they? No. And America doesn't have any ability to invade mainland China or do anything about this other than get in a fight that would cause us to lose major cities in at least the western half of the United States. And cost us the second biggest trading partner we have after Canada, that we've been getting along with since Richard Nixon in 1973. Went over and shook hands with Mao Zedong, 74. So that'll be my next book, I guess, as soon as I'm done with enough already. We'll be back the hell off Russia and China. This is all America's fault, obviously. Who coined the phrase full spectrum dominance over the planet Earth? The Russians, the Chinese, or the Americans on your multiple choice test? And just look at a map or a globe and think how crazy it is, no matter which partisan politicians you believe in or don't. Just look at the Earth and think, wait, so the plan is that the middle part of North America will wage the world government over the rest of the planet from now on, that Eurasia belongs to us. And whatever balance of power is going to exist between Europe, Russia, China, India, Iran, and all the stands and all these things will forever be decided in Washington, D.C. And it's supposed to last like that from now until when? It's crazy. And to think for a moment that something like a constitutional republic with a Bill of Rights that means what it says and stuff like this, anything like the semblance of a free economy where someone born low on the totem pole can make good and build up his own wealth and do better, to think that a system like that could survive a state of permanent war like this, you don't have to be Ron Paul to be able to see the crisis still coming, which he sees it. But anyone should be able to see, I made a bumper sticker back in 2003 that's way too long for a bumper sticker. It says, all empires fall, but not this one, though, because I'm pretty sure that our empire will last forever and ever. Because I couldn't think of a dumber way to put it. Hey, I propose conquering the whole Middle East. I bet we can afford that. Yeah, and we'll roll it back never. And it'll be fine. It seems like everybody, and you know what, I shouldn't be too patronizing about it. I'm sorry. The fact of the matter is, most Americans see through this now. It's just Washington, D.C. that refuses to give in. And, that's why, whether it's Tulsi Gabbard or somebody else, there is a huge fight over war and peace that's just waiting here. That's one thing about regular elections and all of that stuff. And you look at Donald Trump, for example. There's no narrative in media that said that Jeb Bush is this weak, pathetic loser who can't even please his wife and is certainly in no position to be the alpha male of our country. That was being written by no one anywhere ever. I'm not saying this is really a political issue, but it's the same thing. And Donald Trump was willing to say, Jeb Bush is pathetic. He's weak. He's soft. No one respects him. He can't lead. And then what could they do? Just censor that and not let us hear it or something? He said it. And then it worked. And people took one look at Jeb and said, man, he is even a bigger loser than his loser, stupid brother who ruined everything. And so it's just an example of the fact that politicians in an election where votes are on the line, that in that process, they can end run the media, right? Same as Ron Paul and Rudy Giuliani, where everybody's MySpace avatar changed to Ron Paul right away. People started passing that YouTube around. The fact that CNN wouldn't play it didn't matter. I think that, as I like to put it, I'm trying to think of a better way to explain this because I don't know how catchy this is or what have you, but kind of the way I conceive of it is that there's this huge gap between what's really happening and the narrative of what's happening. And there's this huge gap between what's really happening and what should be happening, where, the truth is this unbearable parade of crimes. And so that ought to give us our comparative advantage right there, that there, or that provides an opening for any candidate of any party to just get up there and say, look, all these following 10 things aren't true. And in my presidency, we're going to undo it all, blah, 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 and fight about whatever they want. And you can't really stop them from doing it. And I think, Tulsi Gabbard is in a great position, for example, to just say, everybody up here on the stage thinks we should have done more to back al-Qaeda in Syria. How come you guys all love al-Qaeda suicide bombers so much? How come you think that Ayman al-Zawahiri is a good guy compared to Bashar al-Assad, who shaves his chin every morning and wears a three-piece suit and has dinner with John Kerry and his wife? Answer me that. Now, she's not going to do it like that, but you know what I mean. She's got the substance to whoop all their butts, and they don't have anything. They have nothing on her. And I think they think that her foreign policy, her foreign policy is her weakness. So they keep, oh yeah, how come you love Assad so much and all this? But all they're doing is setting her up to whoop their ass, man, to knock that right out of the park, because she knows what she's talking about, and all they know is what they saw on TV, some narrative that they memorized that they don't really understand. And so not just Gabbard, but anyone who is, has enough credentials to be in this race, if they would just get their act together on some of these facts and tell the truth about who's zooming who and how it is that our government has us, choosing al-Qaeda over Iran half the time and all these kind of things, that I think they can make some real headway. Go back to 2004. Weak, pathetic, loser, Assad friend John Kerry, who later turned on his friend, of course. But anyway, John Kerry was such a wimp. Here he's running against George W. Bush, the worst president since Woodrow Wilson, the cross-eyed dolt, the cruel, spiteful, ignorant little warmonger liar, killer, who'd been on TV saying, I say to the Iraqi insurgents who want to kill our soldiers, bring them on. Huh? Are you kidding me, dude? He later said that was the one mistake of his presidency, that he really wished he hadn't have said that, because dead soldiers' dads had written him and said, you son of a bitch for doing that. Oh, huh. I guess kind of got a little too excited that one time. John Kerry could have just bazookaed George Bush to oblivion in the election of 2004. He lied us into war against a weak, pathetic country that never attacked us. He's gotten thousands of Americans killed for nothing. Tens of thousands of Iraqis, and things are only getting worse over there. And can you believe it, that our government would be so cynical to exploit the September 11th attack to try to do a bait and switch on you and your mom, to let them start a war against a country that had nothing to do with it? Vote Kerry. This criminal must be held accountable. Vote Democrat. That's all he had to do. And he was too afraid to use. I mean, think about that. Being the major party candidate for president of the United States and holding your fire and pulling all your punches because you're afraid. Well, what might they say if you go ahead and tell the truth and go ahead and blast them? And then he lost. He lost to George W. Bush. And you know what Bush did? Here's what put Bush over the top, other than stealing Ohio, which, whatever, either way. But what put him over the top was they did an ad that they ran the hell out of that showed a bunch of wolves all sitting in the sun on a rock. And then they notice the cameraman and they get up and they start moving towards him. And then he says, vote Bush. And John Kerry didn't go, oh my God, this is the guy who, helped all those wolves escape from their pen. He's the one who, whatever it was, right? He didn't sit there and say George Bush has put us all in so much more danger, and now he wants to paint himself as our defender. John Kerry didn't have the courage to do that. But think about how severely he could have, and what are they going to do? Shut him up? And so all he had to do was tell the truth, and the truth was horrible. And so I don't know. That's the way I think of it, is when the reality and the narrative are so different from each other, that is an opportunity for people who tell the truth to make some real headway, and that's, inside of politics and out.
Yeah, I guess we do know the Democrats are really stupid and may do kind of what the Republicans tried to do to Ron Paul and, think that they're going to play up the, foreign policy aspect and it's going to hurt them when really it's going to help them. And maybe they'll do what, they did with Donald Trump and really promote him, the way they did Tulsi Gabbard as being on the far left. And they'll end up hurting them because I don't think Bernie, a mainstream candidate or like Elizabeth Warren seems to have the courage to take those positions, but maybe somebody eventually will.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I'll tell you what, though, there's like 20 people in the field now. And I think, we'll see. But I think early victories by Gabbard are going to really put a lot of pressure on the rest of the Democrats to stand on her side of the line in the sand. And I think the attacks against her are going to backfire. And I think that, look at Elizabeth Warren, for example. She just seems like Hillary. She seems very centrist. I know she's got her whole thing about banks that Hillary never had or whatever, but that's not really what matters. What matters is image, right? And she's sort of this old lady. She's not pretty, I don't know if she ever was, but she's like grandmotherly kind of now, but not in a very pleasing or like pleasant way, I guess I mean to say. Sort of like Hillary Clinton, a little bit of a dragon lady there. And so how is she going to differentiate herself so that people don't just see her as Hillary? And I think she only has one choice, and that is she has to move left on war big time. And, she's been to Afghanistan a couple of times. She did have the courage to go on the Maddow show and say, no, I don't care what you say, Rachel. I'm sorry, man. If Trump wants out of Afghanistan and out of Syria, I support him on that. We've got to end these wars. And Maddow's like, man, I would way rather kill every last baby in Afghanistan than let Trump be the one to end that thing, is her position, of course. But I think when Gabbard sets the standard, the rest of these people are going to have to figure out where they stand quick. And they're not going to be able to just do like Beto O'Rourke and go, oh, well, we need to have a discussion about that and figure that out and this and that when other people are staking their stand. And, Israel is another one. I hope you're reading Philip Weiss every morning like I am, man. He's just blowing my mind. I'm having so much fun. There's a brand new interview of him I did for Sunday's KPFK show. It should be posted today on the site, where he is just obsessed with this Democratic Party crack up over Israel. That Netanyahu has identified himself with Donald Trump and the American Republican Party so badly that it has really thrown the bipartisan nature of support for Israel into major question. And, Netanyahu is so blatant about it that it's becoming maybe not just easier, but maybe even the pressure is really on American liberal Jews to go ahead and forsake at least the Netanyahu government and its policies. That they just do not, as the quote this morning was about the reaction to Netanyahu's announcement that he was going to start annexing parts of the West Bank, that this sent chills down the spines, according to the New York Times or whoever it was, it was some very major paper, was saying this has really shaken the American liberal Jewish establishment. The Democratic Party establishment is really concerned about this. Because they are two-state people. They're Zionists, but they don't believe in this cruel domination of the people of Palestine. When they say two-state solution, they don't mean it as a ruse. They mean it, which the Israeli government certainly does, but they mean it. And so they look at the annexation of the West Bank and they're going, no, this ruins everything. How are we ever going to just have liberal Israel if we can only have right-wing Israel as it dominates the Palestinians? That's the way they look at it. And so they're really more sand lines being drawn and who's on whose side here. And look at the response from numerous, maybe dozens of prominent and medium prominence. I don't know, whatever, but many, many, many American Jewish writers came out and defended Ilhan Omar. So she's not an anti-Semite. What she says is correct and you leave her alone. And even Bernie Sanders, the front runner, the Jewish front runner in the Democratic Party, has said, I met her. She's nice. She's not an anti-Semite. Stop picking on her. Whatever. Sometimes people don't articulate what they want to say just right. And so, I'm not trying to give him a bunch of credit necessarily, but I'm just saying this is the lay of the land here now, where Israel absolutely is controversial on the Democratic side. And and this is the context of Weiss's piece this morning is about Pelosi. So Pelosi's interviewed on 60 Minutes. They don't ask her about this issue at all, but she's really staking out, the obvious center-left Democratic Party Pelosi position on all of this stuff. And she's essentially steeling herself for this, left and progressive revolt against the Democratic Party's position on Israel. So I'm really excited about that. AOC, who I think is a complete dum-dum. I really would like to like her just because she's the new guy, and I like watching the way the Republicans just completely freak out about her. It's just so funny to see that, regardless of how shallow she is. But then she said the other day, oh, yeah, aid to Israel is totally on the table. Let's talk about it, man. I'm not the leader on this. There are other people who know a lot more about it than me, but I think that the days when we just act like this is all fine and good and we don't need to discuss it are over. This is a major headline in the Jerusalem Post, in the Jewish Daily Forward, and in Haaretz. And this is a huge signal. Again, just as they call it, the Overton window. I don't know where that comes from. I don't care. But what's allowed to be discussed in polite American politics. It used to be that, no, you can't discuss that. But now you can. And you know what? It's pretty hard, isn't it, to frame a bunch of essentially civil rights type progressive leftists, oftentimes, quote unquote, people of color, as they put it, with being a bunch of anti-Semites. They're not anti-Semites. Look how many of them are Jews who are right in the exact same milieu. This is about, and think of what a tragedy it is that it's like up to the socialists to rally around the premise of natural individual rights of the American Enlightenment, that even if you're a Palestinian, you have the divine right. You own your own soul. You own your own property, and nobody can take it from you, or they're the thief and you're the victim. Those are the rules. That's the consensus for the last 250 years, at least 300 years, right? Or not? What are we doing here? And I think, anyway, it's a fight now. And this campaign season, it's only just getting started. I really need to knock this book out so I can get back on the radio full time. I'm tired of doing just interviews, man. As you can tell, I like having my own say.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the things that I think I'm noticing is that, right now Israel is so pro-Trump, and I think Netanyahu views, his pretty utter support from Trump. I mean, Lindsey Graham talked to Netanyahu about annexing the Golan Heights, and Lindsey Graham said, I'll talk to Donald Trump, and a couple of weeks later it's done. But maybe that's going to hurt Israel in the United States and really make, kind of that left really start to question that relationship because Trump seems to like it so much, especially when you start to look at, it's very clear that what you have in Israel is class differences and race differences, and that the Palestinians are, especially those in Gaza, are in prison there. And so, I think eventually that kind of imagery of brown people walking up to a bordered wall with troops on the other side, maybe, liberals will start to say like, maybe Israel is kind of like what we, fantasized that Trump was going to be like. Because I certainly do think that's kind of the imagery. Like what they expected on the southern border is what's happening right now in Gaza.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. Peter Van Buren joked that, like, if you want to get Rachel Maddow to shut up about the southern border, just sprinkle a couple of Palestinians in there and she'll forget all about it. In that same situation. I wish my mind worked like that. All the great jokes available here with all these ironies. It's certainly true. I used to be funny. I swear I was back when I was a kid. And this is the thing, Kyle, is the entire premise of poor old innocent Israel, our friend, facing down the evil terrorist enemy out there and all these things. It's based, premise one, on the misunderstanding or the disunderstanding, maybe, that Israel and Palestine already are separate countries. That Palestine is the country next door. That Gaza and the West Bank and what have you, that it's full of these Muslim terrorists who won't stop attacking Israel. And even the way they frame the negotiations, they call it land for peace. And they make it sound, and I know this because as a, former teenager and consumer of American media, I remember my former vague impression that I used to have, even as a 20-something maybe. I never was much of a sides taker because I knew that I didn't know enough about it. But the overall idea, it's very vague. When you nail it down, it doesn't add up. But essentially the idea is that the Palestinian terrorists won't stop trying to extort land out of the Israelis. If you give us some of your land, we will stop terrorizing you. That's the way it's framed, that's the position of the Palestinians, that they are trying to take land away from Israel, from the country next door where they already are on the other side of the border there. But that's just not at all right. Okay. So once Americans understand the first thing about it, then they understand that actually the Palestinians were already conquered. They got most of their country taken away from them in 1948. There are millions of them living in refugee camps around the world and in countries around the world who are the exiled and the children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren of the exiles from 1948. And then there was another massive war in 1967 that the Palestinians didn't start, that the Israelis actually started against Egypt, and then Syria and Jordan jumped in, and Israel beat all three of them. And they took Gaza, which then was under the control of Egypt, and the West Bank, which was then under the control of Jordan, and they've kept them ever since. Only instead of expelling all the people like they did in 1948, which I'm not saying was morally justified in any way, but I'm saying it created a sustainable 80-20% super duper Jewish majority there so that they could be a Jewish state and a democracy. And they still treat the 20% of the population as second-class citizens there, maybe third-class citizens. But they do have Israeli citizenship, even though they're discriminated against. But that is, again, in strictly descriptive terms, not moral ones, that was a sustainable project. But ever since 67, they've been occupying these millions of people in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, and in the Gaza Strip. And also the Golan Heights, although they cleansed the Golan Heights of another 140,000 people then. So they made that more of a sustainable project by moving Israeli Jews there. And there's still a lot of Druze, some of whom have taken Israeli citizenship. That's in the north there. That's territory that was taken from Syria. But the real crisis is in the occupation of the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza, where they are essentially held as helots, which in Rome, they were like a class above slaves. So it's not that the Israeli Jews are keeping the Palestinians to force them to work for free. They don't want them there. They want to expel them. But they treat them like helots. It was like a step up above slavery, where they still essentially have no rights. They have no civil rights, no civil liberties, no political representation in their government at all. And they talk about, part of this ruse that Palestine is already the state next door. For some reason, they keep talking about a Palestinian state and a two-state solution in the future. But, because I thought that it was already the country next door, because they always talk about the Palestinian Authority. Well, how come they don't call it the Palestinian government? Because it's not. It's an Israeli-American project. It's a thing that was created under the Oslo Agreement as a transition to an independent Palestinian state that would have its own new government. And yet the Palestinian Authority has stayed essentially, they're like trustees running an Israeli prison. The 972 mag, which is, primarily liberal Israeli Jews run that. They one time wrote an article where they said, for a foreigner to really understand, the easiest way to understand it is that the West Bank is like an open air prison, sort of a minimum security. Open air. They both are. The West Bank is sort of a minimum security prison, whereas the Gaza Strip is a maximum security prison. And that's the level of liberty that they have. None. Right? They're worse than subjects. They are captives, and they're not allowed to leave. And they don't want to leave. They want to keep their land. But they're not even allowed to leave, other than with Israeli permission. They're completely subjugated, disarmed, occupied, ruled, tyrannized people. And it's absolute, horror show. It's unending war crimes, as you mentioned, slaughtering people. Just a child was killed yesterday at the Gaza protests. Hundreds have been in the last year. And all they're doing, unarmed people marching to the fence and saying, I want to go back to my grandma's home. It's right there. I can see it, essentially. And they're not allowed to because they're born with the wrong religion. As simple as that. And think of the double standard where, and again, this goes to sort of the disinformation, the disunderstanding that they would prefer you to have. They talk about the Gaza border. Well, is it a border or is it not a border? Because if it's a border, then the law is way different than what's going on now. What it is now is it's an occupied territory being ruled by a foreign government. It's not a border at all. You can cite the position of the containment fence. You could say that it should be a border and that the Palestinians should be independent there, that it should be treated as a border. But, it's too late for that now anyway, as more and more people are understanding that you can't have a two-state solution because too much of the West Bank has already been colonized by Israeli Jews. Again, that's what we're talking about with the Democratic Party crack-up. Now that Netanyahu is claiming, at least threatening, to start annexing these settlement areas outright, that just precludes the possibility of a Palestinian state. Which really goes to show kind of the right-wing sort of racist chauvinism of the liberal Zionists here. That, their real problem is that they are exclusionists. They want to they don't want the Palestinians to be under Israeli rule anymore because it's wrong to deprive them of representation in the government that they're ruled under. They respect them enough to say, well, they deserve to be independent and free, but they do not want to let them just be Israelis. What if they just recognize that in reality, Israel annexed the West Bank and the Gaza Strip back in 1967, and they never intended to let them go, and they're not going to ever. So why not just admit that? And then the answer is because then it's a 50-50 demographic split. Israeli Jews lose their 80-20 super duper majority, so they can't be a Jewish and democratic state anymore. It'd have to be one or the other. A Jewish state with outright admitted, go ahead and call it that because there's no other way to spin it, apartheid state, no longer in the process of moving toward a two-state solution someday, or a state where everyone has equal rights and it's a democracy, but it's no longer a Jewish state and no longer necessarily guaranteed to be ruled by Jewish parties. And, they apparently think that that latter option is too dangerous and scary and objectionable. And that's why they're against Netanyahu officially annexing these settlements, is they would prefer to let the Palestinians go so that they don't have to, be countrymen with them. And of course, we're talking about American Jews who, most of whom are, their preferences here, most of whom are not Israeli dual citizens at all and only have a peripheral interest here anyway, or like a spectator's interest. But they do spend a lot of money, for all the complaints about Israeli influence in American politics. Americans intervene, not just our government, but right-wing, very wealthy American Jews intervene in Israeli elections too. Sheldon Adelson is a huge backer of the Likud party. What if the law in Israel was that anybody with dual citizenship in America can't donate and has to stay out of the elections? Right? We don't know. Maybe they would have much less Likud influence there. Maybe the whole government would move to the left. But that's certainly part of the right-wing consensus comes out of the United States here. Boy, I've been going on and on, but I got a lot to say about this stuff.
Yeah, well, I mean, even look at in the run-up to these recent elections, Netanyahu played up his relationship with Donald Trump, and Donald Trump made announcements like allowing or saying that the Golan Heights was Syrian territory or Israeli territory, and then going ahead and I guess having Pompeo going through with his plan of labeling the IRGC a terrorist organization. And, that seems to be influencing elections to me that, Trump really wanted to convince the people that, to vote for Netanyahu. Also, the IRGC terrorist label didn't even take place till after the election. They just announced it before. And so it's not like something that had to urgently be done. It seems very clearly timed for politics to me. The other thing, just thinking here with Israel is calling an apartheid state. One of the things you had talked about in the past on your show that really made that clear to me was something from the WikiLeaks, and that was putting the Palestinians on a diet. And this, I can't even describe what this did to kind of change my perception of that, situation there, Scott, and realizing how much of this was Israeli oppression of the Palestinians.
Yeah, and there was a quote from Dov Weissglass, who worked for Ariel Sharon, who said that, we want to put them on a diet. We don't want to starve them to death, but we just want to put them on a diet. And then there, in the WikiLeaks, is the State Department cable reporting back that the Israelis explained they wanted to keep the people of the Gaza Strip, who at that time, and I think still, are majority minors, if that's not a contradiction in terms, majority under 18. We want to keep them hungry, but not starving. And that it just goes to show, first of all, who is in control of the Gaza Strip. It ain't Hamas. It's Israel. They might have withdrawn the settlers from there, but then they just turned the whole place into, Escape from New York, Prison by the Sea. So, sorry, that's a 1980s reference for us oldsters. And so who determines how many calories a Gazan child gets? Some minister working for Ariel Sharon. So forget taxation without representation. Okay? These people are occupied, subjugated, essentially deprived of all liberty. And, everything that comes in and out of their borders is only with, Israeli coordination, supervision, approval, and they can turn off the spigots whenever they want. And they had released also, lists, I think this was in the WikiLeaks as well, the list of the banned items. And I think some of this had changed now because of the publicity, importantly. But chocolate was banned, and certain kind of nuts, and God knows what, just what would seem to you to be just arbitrary cruelty, essentially, of withholding different, things from the people of the Gaza Strip. That's just horrible. People say, oh, you're singling out Israel. Well, show me where else in the world this is happening, where you have, and I guess, you could talk about, Han Chinese domination in Tibet or something like that, I guess. But okay, right then, that just goes to show you then. So the Israelis are the Chi-Coms. Is that it? Tell me another one, right? Like, at what point is this perfectly okay because somebody else is doing the exact same horrible thing to somebody else somewhere else? There are so very few examples in the world. This is against the law since World War II. It's against the law to invade a country and move your population there. If you have a war, you occupy the country, the law is that you're leaving sooner or later. And one country doesn't get to take over another country anymore. The UN Security Council will kill you. That's the law. But the Israelis, somehow they can do this because America says that they can.
Yeah, I mean, looking at two other places where almost a similar level of oppression may be taking place in Myanmar with Rohingya, the Muslim minority there, and then in India in Kashmir with the Muslim minority in that country. Right. Yeah, it's again the U.S. and Israel that are main backers of these two countries. Right. I think India was like the top weapons buyer from Israel this past year.
Yeah, same thing with apartheid South Africa in the 80s. It was the Reagan administration's attitude and the Shamir administration. I think it was Yitzhak Shamir then. Their attitude was, hey, we like the cut of your jib. Apartheid, white South Africa dictatorship. Let's do business. And the Israelis, in fact, furnish them with nuclear weapons, which they gave up when they were giving up their power to the black majority at that point. They said, oh, well, we don't want to let Mandela have A-bombs. So that's the only country other than Kazakhstan. They're the only two countries to have nukes that and gave them up.
All right, Scott, maybe we should wrap up there. We've been talking for quite a while. I've covered a lot of really interesting, important content here. I'm sure everybody's going to love it. I don't know. Everybody go to libertarianinstitute.org, antiwar.com, scotthortonshow.org, foolserrand.us. Is there anywhere else, Scott?
That's about it. Unless people want to join up our awesome little private Reddit group there at r/Scott Horton Show. But that's for donors only. It's our private little group along Tom Wood's Facebook lines here for those who donate $5 a month at scotthorton.org or at patreon.com.
No, it's definitely where all the cool people hang out. I'm actually,
I like it. I really think it's great, man.
No, Shane and Nico are in the group, and you did your show last week. Me and Will were on their show. I think that's probably going to be coming out today. Cool. And then Mance is in that group, so. Yep. Car Camp It Right is in there, as long as a couple other people. So there's a lot of great discussions in that group. It's pretty active too, and I like the actually Reddit forum over like the Facebook group, like Tom Woods, because everything gets lost on that stupid page. So this is great. And make sure you're checking out antiwar.com especially. Thanks everyone. All right, that wraps it up. I hope everybody enjoyed the shows this week. Interview with Will and then, this very long one with Scott. I think it was great content and, focused really around the most important subject that we're dealing with right now. And that is the arrest of Julian Assange and, setting precedents to criminalize journalism. So this is important and, we need to continue to talk about it. Of course, I will, be talking about the wars and everything, what's going on right now around the world next week. But, this was an important topic that we really covered on this week's show. And I hope everybody feels, very qualified and ready to go out there and defend Julian Assange.